Hello and welcome. This is Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So it looks like we're down to our final 6 weeks together in this course. I know this is the last course for many of you, and many of you will be graduating in May. So let's make it count. Please stay focused, keep up the great work, and let's finish the semester strong. So in today's video, we're going to go over Lab 5-02. So first, I'll go ahead and review the assignment directions a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and install the React developer tools. After that, just want to kind of mention about Vite. So we can run Vite in Dev, so you can kind of be making changes to your code without having to rebuild and restart your server. So you'll have kind of auto compile and hot reload. And then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and walk through a few different files I kind of created. There's multiple files obviously you need for this as far as screens are concerned, but I'm just going to kind of walk through the main, this entry point ones, and then kind of like user list and user list item. So, and actually I think also the editor, user list editor as well. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Okay, so as far as our directions for this lab, so this is all about creating your screens, kind of the rough draft, so to speak, just kind of getting something up and running. Everything doesn't have to work necessarily, right? We're not going to hook everything together with like our APIs, and a lot of the functionality won't be there. So basically, like I said, we got 6 weeks to go, so this is going to kind of be evolving for the next 6 weeks. Okay. So first, obviously the first steps here, you should all be good with this, right? You've already installed React and TypeScript. You installed Tailwinds, right? And so then we're down to our step 3 here is our screen mockups. So I know all of you in previous courses, maybe even 2, used Balsamiq. So here's the license key for that. Okay. So that's good until, and I'll send that to you separately. So that's good until April 17th. Okay. So let me bring up Balsamiq real quick here. My own version, my local. Might have been a while since you've looked at this. Now this is optional as far as these labs, as far as this lab's concerned. It's optional to go ahead and create these, but I highly suggest you spend some time doing it. But it is an optional task. So first, come in here to Balsamiq and then go to the help menu. Most likely, you probably have an older version, so I would check for updates. I actually just updated mine. So the latest version is 4.8.6. Okay. You can come in here also, and you probably should update your license. Yours is probably expired, so hit register, and the license key, you just cut and paste and put that right in here. Okay, and then hit register, and you should be good. I just did it to update mine myself, so I have 32 days remaining. Okay, let's see here. So as far as this is concerned, there's lots of different options in here. Creating a browser window and so forth. So on the tab all, you can click all. Here's like a browser window. You just drop that right in here. If you want to put the actual link to what it's going to end up being, that's fine as well. You don't necessarily have to do that though. But you can go ahead and start from there. Obviously, you can drag things in here, drag in buttons, drag in fields, etc. Right? I'm not going to spend time walking through this. It's like I said, it's optional. You got your form elements all here. as well, check boxes, etc. If you want, there is a I'll go ahead and send you the link to this as well. So there's different tutorials if you want to walk through some of these, how to do the different things. All right. Because I know it's probably been a while since you've done anything with this. Okay. So next here, so what we're gonna do, so this is the mock, this is just for the mock-ups, okay? Just telling you what to put here in that. And then step 4, this is required, right? So this is definitely something you're gonna need to do here. So you wanna kind of, build the rough draft, so to speak, of your screens, your different screens, right? So we have our app, and I'll show you what we're going to be changing in that. We got our app.tsx file. And also, you're going to have your navigation. We're not going to worry about necessarily navigation right now, but you're going to create a login form, a register form, just all the different ones, right? Now here's a bug list item. So bug list should be kind of the list of all your bugs, right? Where bug list item will be, you can call it bug list item or bug summary, whatever you want, but that's going to be an individual one, right? Okay. So this isn't two different things, right? You can call it bug list item, bug summary, whatever you want to call it, right? And there's a lot of flexibility in all this. This is something for you to create, right? Now, obviously, for our final project, there are some rules, that you have to kind of follow. We're going to have certain types of roles, right? And if you recall, who can update a role for a user, that's only a technical manager, right? So there are some things that you're going to have to do that, isn't necessarily flexible, but there's a lot of this is very flexible on how you want to create it. This is your baby, so to speak. You create things how you want to create it, right? So then you got your bug list. Here, let me point out before I get too far along here. So you need to use the useState component, right? The useState component holds onto the data, right? It's stateful data, holds onto that data, right? Just tells you what fields need to be there. Call an event handler when the user successfully logs in. Now we're not going to hook up necessarily. We're going to have an event handler there, but we're not going to really be hooking that up with the back end, right? With our BetterAuth. So, but we'll just have it there. We'll work on that next week, okay? And then you'll have your register farm. We'll also have an event handler in there, but it's just going to be bare bones, and we're going to add to that later, okay? Now, the ones that I'm going to go through here a little bit today is I just have some examples. So I got a login form. I've got a user list item, user summary. Okay. Well, actually, I just have a user list item. I'm not calling it user summary. I have a user list that contains user list items. And I also have a user editor as well. Okay. But pretty straightforward here. Basically, you're just going to kind of include all the fields and so forth that's necessary on the screen. It's kind of part of your, it's kind of a reflection of what you have in your database, so to speak, right? So, all right. So we did that. Next, I wanted to talk about, and I'll send you links on all this stuff, the Balsamiq, both the tutorials and license key. And then also there's React Developer Tools. So I highly suggest you go ahead and install this extension for React Developer Tools. I already have mine, so that's why it's saying remove from Chrome, because it's noticing that I already have it. I come up here, you can see my React Developer Tools is listed. Right? So I highly suggest you go ahead and do that. And here in a little bit, when we get into showing you some of these examples I have in the browser, I'll show you that as well. Okay. Okay. That's our React Developer Tools. Okay, next we'll go into Visual Studio Code here. I think I'll just get rid of these. Okay. So the first thing I just wanted to mention, in our package.json, make sure, we're going to be working on the front end. We've been so used to being in the back end part, right? Which is basically in the way we have ours set up. It's the root directory, our source here, right? It's our back end. But here's our front end, right? So we're going to be working on doing a lot in the front end here. So if I go to the package.json file in the front end, and don't confuse that with the one that's in the back, the back end, right? So in here we have our Vite and we have the build here. So what's going to end up happening here is when we actually run dev, when we do npm run dev, okay, the way Vite works, does the hot load and all that together. So even if you change any of your TypeScript files, right? So we're going to be building some components like this, right? Whenever you change any of these, all right, sometimes things go wrong, but most of the time, Vite's going to know that you changed it, right? And it's going to go ahead and just reload it. So you should be able to just kind of, once you have your server up and running, sometimes though, when you're doing things and changing things, you'll see errors will kind of pop up in the browser until you finish, and then, because it's constantly reloading, okay? Occasionally, it may not always work. You may have to stop your server and restart it again, but for the most part, it should pick up changes and reload them in the browser. Now, the next thing I wanted to mention is our different interfaces. So we use the interfaces for user and bugs, and maybe you created some other ones as well. Hopefully you did, for like the comments and the test cases and so forth. So, but we're going to also, since we're using TypeScript on the front end, we're using TypeScript everywhere pretty much, right? Back end and front end. So you're going to want to have those interfaces available. So here I've got, and yours could be a little different, right? So I know people called some things differently, and that's okay, right? But here's one for like user and bug. But one thing I did want to mention that's going to be different is we don't want to have anything that integrates necessarily with our Mongo database, right? You really want to keep your front end separate. You want to do it in a way that, the separation of concerns, whereas you don't want to have anything in your front end that knows that, hey, my database is a Mongo database. Because what if you decide to switch out your database? Then you have to switch out all your front end stuff as well. I mean, you have to make changes on your front end code as well. You want to try to keep that separate, because the way your front end talks to your Mongo database is via the APIs, right? Via the APIs that we've been creating. So the front end really shouldn't know that's really a Mongo database on the back end. It doesn't need to know that, right? Now, when we start talking about our middle tier, when we get to our the middleware that we're using, right? When we get to our API calls, our express calls, then, we want to kind of keep that as much separate too, but sometimes it needs to know what we're kind of using for like Mongo. We're using the object IDs and so forth, right? So these interfaces, you can just grab the ones you have that you've already kind of developed for that backend, right? In your APIs, and you can copy them over. I just created a types.ts file. So these are our different TypeScript types, our interfaces. And like I said, these might look a little different. One thing you will need to change, though, is all of these probably, if would think that when you created them, they should have an object ID here, right? Because we were using those object IDs. What you need to do is change them all to string, right? The front end don't need to know. It can know that hey, I've got an ID, but it doesn't need to know this is a type of Mongo object ID, right? Object ID is more of a Mongo type thing, right? So if you have your IDs, you're going to need to change them all to string, okay? Anywhere you're using an ID, all right? Next thing I want to mention, basically, I guess not this last week, but the week before, part of that assignment is to allow that a role could either be a string or a string array. And the whole idea is that is, most time in large companies, some users have, the larger the company, the more specialized roles are. But when you got smaller in a smaller organization, you could have multiple roles. The QA person could also be a developer, or the business analyst could also be a quality analyst. Checking the code. Doing some test cases, right? But also be the business analyst, right? So they could have more than one role. So the idea is, it's possible that you could just have one role, being a developer role or a systems analyst, but it's possible that you could have more than one role. Okay, and so that's what this does. So I'm not sure if you kind of updated yours for that scenario, but just to let you know that this is kind of the preferred way to handle that as well. Okay. And like I said, these are just the different interfaces kind of used when we were doing our APIs, and yours may look different, right? And then in here we've got a interface bug, which has comment, test cases, work, and them are all defined here as well, right? Okay. And remember, this is always evolving. You may want to change some things. Oh, I really should have done it this way or that way. It's a constantly evolving things. And like I said, we got 6 weeks to go. So, you'll be making tweaks and changing some things here and there throughout this 6 week period. So, don't get too frustrated. Oh, I got to change this, change that. And even blowing away data is not a big deal. And especially once you kind of get the screens built and say, okay, well, you can actually start adding things very easily from the screens. It's also, there's lots of different ways to create data for the database as well easily. You can even use AI or whatever, drop in a chatbot, create, here's the things, create me sample data. So either way, right? There's multiple ways to get that done quickly. So don't play around too long. If your data gets kind of messed up in a database, you just blow it away and start over with that, right? You might have to do that a few times actually. So, all right. So that's our types. The next thing I wanted to cover here is the main, right? So this gets built, this gets created. V creates this by default at the beginning when it creates a React app. So let's talk about this a little bit. So main is the entry point of a React web application. So some of the older ones, they kind of called it index.tsx, but I think it's going to be basically these later versions using a later version of Vite and stuff like that. It's going to create main.tsx file. So that, it's kind of like actually the front door into your application, right? It's the entry point. And so what it does, it actually injects the browser's document object model. All right. So first here, let's look at some of the imports. So we've got the strict mode. So it's kind of a helper component. So this doesn't render anything as far as the UI is concerned. It just activates extra checks and warnings for, all of the other code, the kind of this descendants, right? So this gets reflected in the other things you do, right? You're saying this is strict mode. You get rid of strict mode here. Your other things that you're including, because this is including the app, right? This is really includes all of your code, right? And we'll look at that here a little bit. But when you have the strict mode, this is going to apply to all of your code, right? Now create root. Create root is the modern way since I think React, uh, starting like React 18. So this enables, no, this tells React which HTML element should host the app. Okay. So down here, you've got, here's your create root that you're using for here, right? And this tells it that document the element by ID root, right? And it renders it. Okay. So next here, so here's our strict mode we're using, right? So we're wrapping everything in strict mode. I added browser router. So yours, if you bring up yours, yours should look very similar to this, except you probably don't have browser router here. Okay. So I added this. Now this isn't really requested in the assignment. Um, but I added this so we could actually see the thing. You could put the URLs in and you could see it actually running. So here real quick, let me just bring up, I just have some, like I said, these example files. So let's just see this run real quick so I can show you what I mean. So we're actually using the browser router here. Actually, here, let's hold on 1 minute. I'll do that after I show the app.tsx file. But we're using this browser router. And so this enables client-side routing, allows your app to change URLs, right? And show the different pages without the whole browser refreshing. So React is all about single page applications. So the whole idea with React is that, you know, when you have a page, right? When you bring up a page in a browser, right? That's your DOM, right? But with React, you can have little components, little pieces that are part of that big page, right? And you can re-render just some certain components without having to refresh the whole page, okay? And that's what really React's, that's the big thing about React is you can update little pieces of your components and you update the state. You can change data. You can do all kinds of things without having to refresh the whole page, right? You're just making those updates based on some certain component, all right? So that's how that browser router helps with that, okay? And then obviously this is the root component of your app, okay? And that is this file here, your app.tsx file. Now, one thing I think that you're going to have, because I don't, unless you've changed some things, I think most people have a bunch of code in here. You're going to kind of want to get rid of that. You can back it up if you just want to come in here for now and just, rename this, .bak, right? And then copy it. And then, if you want to, you can always do that. I do that sometimes for different ones, right? But so here, what we're doing is we're going to be using routes in here, okay? So here's basically our function app. This is when we default this app, this is what gets put right in here, right? And so what we're going to be using is these routes so that we can route to the different pages, right? We are going to have some different pages, right? Now, I did talk about components. We are having these components like this, but a page can be made up of multiple components. A lot of stuff, what we're going to be doing is there's going to be some things that are we are going to have some multiple components on some pages, but getting this started here, pretty much each page is kind of going to be their own component, right? But I will point out when we're using multiple components. So to explain this here a little bit, so routes acts as a container for all your possible pages, right? It looks at the current browser URL and searches through its children to find a match, okay? And then so each route defines a single path, So path login, okay? If the user goes, if you put in your /login in the URL, it's going to search for that. If it finds, if it finds it in this list, then it is going to go ahead and match it to, whatever's here in your element, okay? It tells React to run. It's going to, if you put in login, it's going to tell React, hey, go ahead and render the login page component since it's matches. Okay. So each one of your pages as we go on, you're going to be adding in here. Okay. I just have a few that I've added. All right. All right. So real quick here, let me start up. Do I have anything already running? Let me just kill it if I do. Yeah, just for all right. I have some multiple stuff. Clean that up a little bit. All right. So we're on our front end here. So here we just do what? npm run dev. I don't know what happened there. I think that happens because I made my fonts big for presenting. Okay, so npm run dev. All right, so we're running on 573 port. So we're not worrying about the APIs. So we're not accessing our APIs. We're just working on developing that front end. Okay. And sometimes it wouldn't actually be a bad idea to even hold. Eventually, we're going to connect to our APIs, but it's not always a bad idea to keep your data there too. Their little mock data if you need to switch over, because it makes things a little easier to just kind of stay here at the front end and not worry about that back end. But eventually, we're gonna have those integrated together. All right. Let me pull up. Okay, so here's just the root, and since we don't, depends on how you have. Eventually, we're going to change how we kind of have our routes and stuff. So this will come to the login page in the beginning. I should have had that, but that's okay. So, but what I'm going to do here is I could do the different things. So /login, right? So /login should go to the login page. So let me hit enter here, and so then here's the login page. Okay. So these are the different pages you're going to build. All right. They don't have to look like this. You create them the way you want to create them. Okay. But here's a possible way to your styling is going to be different and everything else. But here's one way to present that. Obviously, at some point in time, we're going to have navigation up here and everything else. Okay, but this is just we're just getting some pages built, just kind of the first draft, so to speak, of your pages, and we go from there. So I have that one. So things are not going to be connected together, right? This ain't going to be connected to actually logging in at this point, but you do have this, right? And then the other ones, so what else did I have? Let's go look at our routes, right? So our route is login. So here's user list. Now you can call these different. Whatever you want to call your paths, it's fine, right? So I'm calling mine user list. So here, if I just do user dash list, I think I was hitting them before. So here's a list of users. Once again, you develop this however you want. If you just want create a table and list them all, and make it a little more concise. Eventually, if you recall when the assignment when we were doing our APIs where we had our sorts and keywords and all that, well, eventually you're going to have a search box up here, right? So you're going to be able to search by username, whatever, right? The different things you can search by, right? And then also we'll have different pages. If you've got 100 different users, right? Then, you're going to have something where you're going to have to go to the next page of users, right? Or you're going to be showing different pages of users. Same thing with the bugs, right? You're not going to be, you know, you're not going to be able to fit all of them probably on one page. You should have multiple pages, but you know, we don't have to worry about that right now, right? We're just building something simple for now, just to take a look at, you know, and then we're going to keep on making changes and working with it and creating a you know, better product as we go along. Now I think I do have this hooked up. So if I hover over here, down here at the bottom of the left, I don't know if you can see it, it's actually, this is linked to user.editor, right? Now remember that you're not doing the same thing as, you know, we learned in HTML about doing links. It's done a little differently, okay? And I'll talk about when we look at this code a little bit, we'll talk about how this is done. It's a little different. You're not just giving this the same link, right? But here's the user editor. And once again, the screen can look however you want it to look, right? This has just gotten the different roles here. And if you recall, right now we don't care about this either, but who can actually change the role? Remember that we had that rule. One of the requirements was only a technical manager can change roles. So basically the way this would work, and you know, when we get to that point, right, we don't care about it at this point, but when we, you know, start getting things wired up, we're going to be checking. We're going to have to check, hey, is this a technical manager? If it is a technical manager, they can change these. If it's not a technical manager, if the role of the person logged in is not a technical manager, then you're probably going to have these blanked out, or you can actually hide this whole part, you know, whatever you want to do, right? But the important thing is just that when we get there, you know, all those other roles, a developer can't come in and change their own role. Only technical managers can change these roles, right? And then I guess, you know, it would be nice coming into this page in the first place that you'd have a developer select it, you know, whatever one's in here would be already selected is their current role, right? Like I said, that it's possible they could have one role or many roles, right? So this would give that option. Okay, so let's look at a little bit at the code here. Get rid of that. Let's look at the login page. Okay. Now all of these pages, you know, they don't have to look like this. You can do some things differently, but there are some certain things that are going to be kind of really important. Obviously, use state. Use state's going to be very important in all your different pages. So use state is basically a React hook. Remember, it's one of the React hooks. So it's important to manage the data and the user types into the form fields. Okay. Then next we have the form event. So this form event it's important specifically for TypeScript to know exactly what kind of event is happening when the form is submitted, right? An HTML form event, right? So in this case, you recall we had an assignment very early on in our thing when we were doing some of that initial JavaScript exercises very early on, where we had to specify that it was an HTML form element. So that's what we're doing here, right? All right. And then link, so this is important to allow us basically navigate, you know, I guess you call it seamless navigation because we had that link, if you recall, on the login page to also go to the register page if needed, right? I didn't create a register page, but there's a link and you should have a link to be able to go to your register page as well. And this don't necessarily, the directions don't tell you that you have to have that. That doesn't really have much there. So, well, here's the link to the register thing. So this here has to match. This is a link. So this is how you do a link. A you don't use an A tag, right? You don't use anchor tag like the HTML in an HTML world, right? In React, we need to use. There's different ways to do this, but this is one of the more straightforward ways. You use a link tag. So we do this to, and this is going to be the name of the form, right? So this here has to match. I don't have it matching because I don't have it created, but this has to match whatever's in here, right? So basically, you create a new one, right? For the when you have a register, you're going to create one. That was just using all uppercase, but whatever. You probably should, whatever you want to do, and then you're going to have a register here, whatever you call it, your component, right? Then obviously you'll have to import it as well, right? So just pointing that out. So that's how that kind of works. Okay. And then next we are just exporting the function called the login page, right? The login page is the name of just like we do any other function. And then here this is where we start using the state, right? In our login page, we don't have as much, right? We have an email, we have a password, right? And this is where this all gets saved, right? Later, not so much, probably more next week, I'll show you, when we kind of walk through example, I'll show you, because when we start really saving some of this state, you have to realize that when things change, while you change things on your screen, it's actually, you may not know it by looking at your screen, and the user don't know it. It's actually making calls to your code, okay? It's actually, when you change things on your page, it's actually changing, it can be changing the state, right? It's based on how you're doing it. If you're doing something on a submit or you're doing on change event, if you're doing an on change event, boom, it's constantly changing things, okay? So we'll talk about that more later. But this is basically saving, right? Email and a password. You never want to use the word, you don't never want to access this by this. You always want to be setting it like that. Set email, set password. Never set it using these itself. If you do, you lose how React wires everything together, and you're kind of bypassing React's internal functionality. So you want to make sure whenever you call something, you set something. If you're setting something in your code, we're not really doing it quite that way here. Oh, well, yeah. Set email and then set password, right? You could actually, like I said, work around and just setting this email equal to, and that's a bad idea. It really goes against React's way of doing things, and so you really want to always make sure you're using the set commands. Okay, and by default, it's empty string, right? Until you do something with it. Okay. Now later we're going to have this all hooked up, right? Well, this is one. Logins page is one of those ones, as this isn't going to get set until you enter data on the page. Some pages we have our state when we enter that page, like when you clicked on maybe a user, and it brings up the page of data for that user, right? When it brings up that data for that user, it's going to already have some state. It's passing state from one page to another, right? Okay, so this is just a simple handle submit. We'll be doing some other stuff in here. You want to kind of do some validation work as well. Now, one thing I do want to also mention that's really important here is when we're using the APIs, we use the debug. We use that the debug for debugging command, console things, and you'd see it down here in your console right? When you start the server, all those other things, right? You know, you'd have all these console apps, you know, connected to the database, you know, you know, got so many users back, etc. Right? But we're on the front end now. Anything that happens in the front end, okay? Anything that happens on the front end is going to go into the browser. This console is going to be in the browser. Okay, console.log. This is going to be in the browser. All right. Let's see. So to call this, you definitely want to do this on submit. You call your handle submit, right? Now, obviously, this isn't all wired up. Eventually, this is going to be wired up that we're going to end up calling our better off. But for now, this is just a kind of a bare bones implementation. As far as the screen layout and what Tailwind's classes you want to use, this is up to you, okay? You can just play around with that however you want things to look, right? So like I was mentioning on change, right? Set email. So basically, when you do on change and set email, actually you're making a call, right? You're making a call. If you actually had you could actually hook this up so that you'd see that it's coming back into this code, right? And we'll worry about that when we move forward later. Just so you can kind of see what things are going on. Especially, it's going to help from debugging purposes. But this is a simple screen where you just basically have set an email and you're setting a password, right? And then you've got your different buttons. Well, actually, just a submit. Well, you have a submit button and then you have a register, right? Okay. And once again, with the link, this has to map what's in your route paths, right? Since I don't have that all hooked up. And it don't have to work right now. You don't have to have everything calling each other. The important thing is that I can just kind of bring up your screen and grade your screens that yes, you complete it. You have a register page, you have a login page, right? Etc. All right. And I think actually like this stuff here, it doesn't even really ask you to do this in the assignment. I think this is really more part of a future assignment, but it just makes life a lot easier for you to just go ahead and do this because it's pretty simple, right? Basically, you just put the name of the path that you're going to put in the URL and you point that to your page, right? So at least you can see it. Okay. All right, so now let's look at user list here. Well, first, let's go. Let's go ahead and look at the login page in the browser first. Okay. So here's our login page. So we just put in login, right? Whatever's in our path that we have in our app.tsx file. And then here I'm just going to go ahead and put in a sample email address, not existing, and a password. And I'm going to hit sign in. Here, let me first bring up developer tools. You can really need to be using the developer tools, and also we'll take a quick look at the React ones as well. But here's this. And so if you recall in our, let me bring back the IDE here real quick. So back in here on our handle submit, when we hit the submit button, console.log working, okay? So when we hit sign in here, boom, there's our working, okay? Obviously be better to have a little bit, be much, but would help if we had a little more descriptive word, but whatever. But successfully logged in, whatever, right? But here's so this is, you kind of want to really get in the habit a lot, especially if you create some page and you got a blank screen, right? If you got a blank screen, you really want to go ahead and first thing you do if you come in, for some reason you have a blank screen, hit F12. See what kind of errors you have in here, right? This is showing you exactly what happened when it did that, and it'll give you some other descriptive stuff as well. In addition to that, we included the React Developer Tools. So what that helps is actually shows you kind of your different components here. Loading React tree. I'm not sure, it seems stuck. That's kind of interesting. Maybe because I don't have things hooked up completely. No. I guess it's just the state. Probably because they handle submit. We're not really doing anything with that. But this is going to show you browser router, right? Provider, apps, routes, right? Login page, link. So it gives you a lot of descriptive information. And as time goes on, right, it even shows you this register. Children, register, showing the class name, showing you've got a register button here, right? So, this will help you as well when we start really debugging. You start getting into things as well, okay? And that's this is the React Developer Tools, okay? The components and this profiler as well. So, but we'll talk about them more in the future. But this can help. This and just in general, the fact that you've got the console here as well. So anytime you do something, if you got an error, your page is blank, whatever. Okay. Now also realize, so let's go back to the ID here real quick. If you kind of break something a little bit. I was looking for something. I should have broke it. It didn't. There we go. Sometimes you'll see it all depends on what you're doing. Sometimes you'll see some errors within here as well. Okay. Sometimes it all just depends on what kind of error. But here it's you're expecting your login page ain't coming up, right? So here you hit F12, right? Use state is not defined, right? An error occurred in the login page component. So things like this will help you out a lot. I'm surprised that first change didn't actually break that. I don't know. Maybe didn't pick it up fast enough or something. So now we should go back there, and these will still be here, but like when you change things, it's got that hot deploy with Vite. So it kind of, once you made those changes, it picked it up, but it still has these messages just because you'd have to kind of delete these, right? The way to do that up here is this one right here. Is clear console. And then if you refresh this, they should be gone. But, all right. Let's see. So next, let's go back over to the user list one. So in this here, same thing. We got a use state, right? So we can tracking the state or saving the state of our different variables, right? Also, we got use effect. So these are both what hooks, right? Use effect and use state. In this one, we're importing user list item. So down here, this is actually just the user list. This is kind of small. This ain't a big file, right? Because actually what we're doing is we're accessing another component. We got one component that's accessing another component, right? Now we're also including our TypeScript type, which is a user. Right? First thing we kind of talked about at the beginning is our interfaces in our types file. So it's user. And so that our data is of type user data, right? So one thing in here is if you've got something missing, right? We're using TypeScript, you got something missing, it's going to tell you, right? Role is not declared here, right? It's the interface, that contract, the contract between, you know, your code and that interface. You said that this is of a type user, right? This is of a type user, but you're missing something, right? Now, obviously, like I said, some of these things may be a little bit, you know, for the most part, yours should be pretty similar for users. You might, you know, once we start talking about bugs and stuff, you know, some of your stuff might look a little different, right? Depends what you called your roles, different things. Now, obviously, in your types here, anything that's kind of a, you know, create date, if you got a question mark here, these are optional, right? So you don't have to have that there. You don't have to have that there, right? So they're optional. And like I said, and the important thing also is remember we're not using object IDs. We're in the front end. We don't care about, you know, we can the object IDs are helpful for us to use to kind of communicate with our APIs and stuff, but you know they don't have to be of type object ID, right? We care about the ID. As long as it's a string, we're good, right? As long as it's a string, we know the ID because that's our not, you know, that's our document ID, right? So we do need to be able to use that to communicate sometimes, right? Tell our backend, hey, give me that specific user ID, right? So based on that document ID. All right. So these are different mock users. And then for our user list function, we're setting the state of our list of users, right? All of it, all of them, right? I probably shouldn't have included this as pending, but that's okay. Once again, you never want to use these, try to set this on, you don't never want to use these, you know, these are just internally used by React. You want to always use the setter methods, right? And if you don't use these setter methods, you'll get some undesirable results. Now our is pending. It's a Boolean flag. This is basically a Boolean flag. By default you're setting it to true. Okay. By default you're setting it to true, and it tracks whether the data is currently loading. It is initialized to true, just because the component starts in a loading state, right? It's loading when you enter it in the beginning. Now the use effect hook runs once when the component first mounts, and that dictates by it being this being, and we'll get into this more in the future too. So it's dictated by the empty dependency array at the end. Okay, this being empty. Okay. We'll see in the future though, we can actually have certain other things in here that will track things that will get called more than one time. Okay. But by default, this use effect runs once when the component first mounts. Okay. If we have things in here, it's going to track when things change, and it's going to run use effect every time something changes. And we'll learn more about that in the future here. Okay. Now we have a timer here, so purpose of this timer is just kind of slow down a little bit when we're doing things over a network, right? So it sets a default of 500 milliseconds, so it creates like a half-second delay to mimic the time it would take to fetch data from the real server over the network, okay? So after the 500 millisecond delay, it populates the user data with the mock users. Okay, so we're just doing this for the mock users, just kind of so it's not instantaneous, I guess, just kind of just for that purpose only, right? And then this here is just going to clear out the timeout. This is kind of best practice. The user navigates away from the page before the 500 milliseconds is up, right? The component will unmount, right? Components are about mounting and unmounting, right? So if, like somebody went ahead and did something, brought up this page, and then within half a second, it's still possible, right? Kind of navigated away from it. If it was a longer one, obviously, if you made this kind of a longer one, it could happen a lot easier, right? That you move away from this, then, this would actually clear out that timeout just in case. So you can include this for now. No big deal on that. Okay, and then that is pending. So we make this longer. This is pending. This would thing actually be, say, loading users, right? Let's make sure that even actually works. Why not, right? So this is the user list. So we're going to change that to that. Hopefully that pulled that up and did a hot deploy. I think it did. What was that user list? Saying loading users, right? And this is beneficial for in a production environment as well, right? You don't want to just sit there. So because sometimes those it takes a while to hit that database, right? So it'll show loading users until it actually loads. There you go. Okay. Then besides that, we're just basically doing a return here. Like I said, this file does a lot less, but what we're doing here on this one, this was showing all users.length. Did we have that on there? I forgot if it was on that screen. Yeah, 14 members. You don't have to include that. It's just what I did here. So here's a grid of the different users, though, right? And what we're doing here is we're basically looping through, right? This is kind of a user.map, right? And so for each user, we're going to do a user list item, right? We're calling that. We're using that component, and the key is the email, right? The email is the key, and the user, the key and the value is the user object itself. So in here in user list item, so in this one we're importing the link. So that's because we're using a link to call the editor. So once again, and you don't have to include this. This is something that actually is kind of more geared to later on. Okay, as long as you got the page displaying, that's fine. You don't have to have them linking together. Okay, I do have mine linking together. That's all, but it's not necessary. Okay. But here we're not displaying everything. We're just basically displaying the user's name and their email, right? We are doing this little role badge. You don't have to do that either. Honestly, all you really just need to do is be showing maybe the full name, email, And you can do that page however you like. If you just want to make that into some kind of a table, that's that's fine as well. I've seen users do I've seen developer, not users, but different students do a lot of different things as far as that's concerned. Some just have rows of each user, and you've got a little, each row has a little button for edit or whatever, right? So lots of different options there. So one thing you can see here we're not doing in this list item, we're not saving the state here in this list item, right? We actually save the state in our user list, right? Well, we do use this. But all right, let's just go look at that. Look at our editor page here a little bit, I guess. And it doesn't matter if, like I said, you don't have to necessarily have them linked together here. I will bring it up though. And so basically I click this user, edit user here, and you've got the different ones, developers selected. Let me see if this is, got my loading user since I made that slower. John Smith. So technical manager selected, right? Different roles. Let me just hit refresh here. It's all looking good. So you can actually access that screen like that. Well, you know why it's complaining? Because you don't have the data, right? So you may have to do some, because the user data is not there, because we're passing that in, right? So maybe in that case, it's better off having it linked so that you don't have to deal with that, but that's okay. You can use that mock data. You can have that mock data in your individual page as well, your editor page as well, if you don't want to have that linked. So, all right. What else here? So that was user editor here. So here we're doing a lot more stuff here. I actually probably should have removed some of this stuff. Yeah, this is doing way too much. This is doing way too much. You don't need all of this at this point. The important thing is, and you could just hard code your data right in the screen. I don't care. Okay. Let's see what the directions say for this. So all you really need here for this, allow the user to edit a single user, store the state of all form fields within the component use state, and call the event handler when the user saves a valid user. Obviously, it's not going to be hooked to the API or at all. So basically, all you need to do is have your form fields. Is the most important thing. Make sure you're using the use state, so you're saving it actually to the use state, right? So in here, for each one of these, let's see here, the editor. You got email, full name, right? Set name. So all of your things are basically your use state are up here. So here's all your different options, right? Like I said, you don't even have to have all of this here. You can just do for the roles. Um, we, this is evolving, right? This is a little too much, but just make sure you got some of your basic use state variables here, and then have a handle submit, right? And this should actually be, not that it matters. Like I said, they don't necessarily have to. Should be user. Just remember these got to match. All right. All right, so that's all I kind of have for right now. The important thing is just kind of get some screens up and running. Okay, we can add stuff later. Try to work on that handle submit and your use state, and that's all that's really kind of important at this point. Okay, include your buttons. I wouldn't worry about all the navigation stuff. Okay, it's not important at this point. You just want to kind of display, and then you can actually at least save. You're not saving data to database, but you will save data within the component itself. So please let me know if you have any questions about anything, and have a great day. Thanks.